The mysteries that surrounded Liam's encounter with Jake left a gaping void in his understanding. The boy had disappeared into the night, leaving Liam with nothing but questions. Questions that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew about his life and loss. Returning to the police station, Liam found his desk under the unrelenting hum of fluorescent lights. His fingers trembled as he opened the bottom drawer, pushing aside old case files to retrieve a manila envelope. Inside was a photo he hadn't dared to look at in months, Michael's final school portrait. The image showed Michael's vibrant grin, his brown hair combed meticulously for picture day, and around his neck, the silver necklace that had always been his signature. The intricate Celtic knot design shimmered in the light. Liam recalled their trip to Ireland when he had bought matching necklaces for himself and Michael. His own pendant, which once hung proudly around his neck, now lay hidden in the drawer too painful to wear since the accident. Liam held the photo closer, the resemblance between Michael and Jake tugging at his heart. The angular jawline, the faint dimple on the left cheek, even the athletic build, it was uncanny. But it was the necklace, identical to Michael's, that haunted him. The boy's image consumed his thoughts, the silver pendant a silent witness to an unfolding mystery. Liam left the station early, the unresolved questions pressing heavily on his mind. As he drove down Preston Street, he scanned the sidewalks and alleys with focused determination. The once busy area was now quiet, with shops locking up for the night. His attention was caught by movement near Murphy's Hardware. Behind a dumpster, a figure bent over, sorting through discarded boxes. Liam parked discreetly and approached, his steps light. There, in the shadow of the alley, was Jake. The teenager was methodically flattening cardboard, his movements practiced and efficient, betraying the harsh reality of his experience. "Jake?" Liam called softly, careful not to startle him. Jake's head snapped up, eyes wide and filled with a mix of recognition and fear. He took a step back, his body poised to run. "Wait," Liam said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I just want to talk. About the necklace." Jake instinctively touched the silver pendant, his eyes narrowing. "What about it?" "Where did you get it?" Liam's voice was calm, though his pulse raced. Jake hesitated, then shrugged. "Some old lady gave it to me. A few years ago at a shelter on 4th Street. Said it was lucky." He let out a bitter laugh. "Didn't work, though." Liam noticed the boy's gaunt cheeks and the way his oversized clothes hung on his thin frame. "When was the last time you ate?" he asked. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I get by. There's a diner around the corner. Let me buy you a meal. No strings attached, just food." Jake hesitated, his eyes scanning Liam's face for signs of deception. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but I'm ordering whatever I want." The atmosphere at Lou's place was warm, the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes providing a strange comfort. Jake slid into a booth and ordered a double cheeseburger with extra fries, while Liam nursed a cup of coffee. Every move Jake made felt like a flashback, his restless fingers drumming on the table, the way he raked his hair back, the tilt of his head when deep in thought. They were all echoes of Michael. The waitress brought Jake's food, and Liam watched as the teenager tried to pace himself, his hunger barely contained. The sight reminded Liam of Michael's earnest attempts at manners during family dinners. "So," Liam began, breaking the silence, "how long have you been on your own?" Jake swallowed a bite of his burger, his eyes avoiding Liam's. "Always," he said flatly. "Foster homes, group homes, never stuck anywhere." "And your family?" Liam pressed gently. Jake tensed, his fingers playing with the necklace. "Don't have one. There was a fire when I was a baby. That's what they told me. Some lady pulled me out. She's the one who gave me this." He held up the pendant. Liam's chest tightened. "The woman who saved you gave you the necklace?" "Yeah. Said it was special, that it'd protect me or something. After that, it was just foster homes. She checked in for a while, then disappeared. People come and go." Liam leaned forward, his heart racing. What was her name? Ethel Green, Jake said, pushing his empty plate away. But that's all I know. She was just someone who cared for a bit. Not many people stick around. Liam sat back, absorbing Jake's words. The mention of the necklace, the fire, and Ethel Green painted a picture he couldn't yet understand. Sarah knew something was wrong the moment Liam walked through the door. After 2 decades of marriage, she could read his every mood. He barely touched the reheated dinner she had prepared, his mind clearly elsewhere. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. Liam set his fork down and sighed deeply. "I met someone today, a teenager." His voice was heavy with emotion. "He was wearing Michael's necklace, Sarah. And he looks just like him." Sarah froze, her breath catching. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "It could be a coincidence." "It's not. The necklace, it's identical. The design, the chain, even a scratch on the back. And the boy—" Liam hesitated, struggling to find the words. "He could be Michael's twin." Sarah's face paled as she leaned back, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Liam, this time of year is always hard. Sometimes grief makes us see things that aren't there. This isn't grief, Sarah." Liam pulled up a photo of Michael on his phone, the necklace visible against his son's chest. "I'm not imagining this. There's something about him, something real. I need to know the truth." The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Liam's car as he parked outside Peterson and Son's funeral home. The familiar scent of lilies and polished wood greeted him when he stepped inside, stirring painful memories. The muted burgundy carpets and serene paintings hadn't changed in 5 years. Mr. Peterson, the funeral director, looked up from his desk, his face composed. "Officer Matthews," he said with polite disinterest. "What can I do for you?" Liam cleared his throat. "I'm here about my son, Michael Matthews. His service was held here 5 years ago." Peterson nodded, tapping at his computer. "Yes, I remember. A tragic loss. I need to know if anything unusual happened during or after the service, specifically if anyone showed interest in my son's personal effects." Peterson's brow furrowed. "That was years ago, Officer Matthews. We handled dozens of services every month. I'm afraid I don't recall." Liam leaned forward, his voice firm. "Please, this is important. Could you check your records or ask someone who might remember?" Peterson sighed and adjusted his glasses. "Most of our staff from that time has moved on, but—" he hesitated. "There was one part-time helper. Martha might remember something. And where can I find her?" "She retired, but she once mentioned an older woman, Ethel Green. She was particularly affected by your son's service, helped with the preparations." Peterson rifled through papers, finding a name and an address. "Here's her last known location." Liam's pulse quickened as he took the slip of paper. "Thank you," he said, already heading for the door. The modest blue house on Cedar Street stood out with its carefully tended rose bushes and a rocking chair on the porch. Liam knocked on the door, his heart pounding. After a moment, it creaked open to reveal a thin, elderly woman. Her sharp, attentive eyes softened as she studied the man on her porch. "Mrs. Green?" Liam asked. "I'm Officer Matthews. I need to ask you about Michael Matthews." He held up the worn photo of his son. Ethel's hand flew to her throat, trembling slightly. "I remember him," she said softly. "Come in." Inside, the living room was cozy and neatly kept, with family photos lining the shelves. Ethel settled into an armchair, clasping her hands tightly. "After the fire at the foster home, I found Jake," she began. "He was just a baby, crying in the wreckage. I tried to save another boy too, but—" Her voice faltered, her pain evident. "He handed me something before he—" She stopped, her eyes brimming with tears. "What did he give you?" Liam's voice was tight. Ethel reached for an old wooden box on the table. From it, She pulled out a photograph, a slightly charred image of a young Michael, and handed it to Liam. This, and the necklace. Liam stared at the photograph, his emotions swirling. "Why didn't you contact me?" "I wanted to," she said. "But by the time I found your address, you'd already moved. I thought I might never see you again." "Why did you give the necklace to Jake?" Liam asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Ethel's gaze softened. "Because he needed hope. He needed to feel connected to something good in this world. And Michael, he was good. I think he would have wanted that." Liam sat back, his mind racing. The connections between Michael, Jake, and Ethel's story were growing clearer, but the truth still felt just out of reach. Later that night, Liam and Sarah sifted through the attic, opening the wooden chest that held Michael's belongings. The musty air was thick with emotion as they pulled out mementos. A baseball glove, school projects, and a tattered comic book. "I don't know if I can do this," Sarah whispered, clutching a small blanket to her chest. The familiar scent brought tears to her eyes. "We have to," Liam said gently. "If there's even a chance of finding the truth." As they sorted through the chest, Sarah found an envelope containing hospital documents. Her eyes widened as she held up a small plastic hospital bracelet. "Liam," she said, her voice trembling. "Look." The bracelet bore the words, "Baby A," followed by their last name and Michael's birth date. "Baby A?" Liam said, frowning. "Why would it say that unless—" "There was a baby B," Sarah finished, her voice barely a whisper. "A twin." Liam's mind reeled as Sarah rifled through the papers, desperately searching for more information. "Did we ever see Michael's original birth certificate?" she asked. "No," Liam admitted. "The adoption agency handled all of that." Sarah's hands shook as she examined the documents. "These are just vaccination records, routine checkups, nothing from his birth." "Then we need to go to the hospital," Liam said. "They must have records." The next morning, Liam found Jake near St. Mark's Church, sitting on a stone bench with his head bowed. His worn backpack rested at his feet. The boy stiffened when Liam approached. "You again," Jake said, his tone wary. "I found something," Liam said, holding out the hospital bracelet. "It's proof. Michael wasn't an only child. He had a twin." Jake's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the bracelet. "What's that got to do with me?" "I think you're his brother," Liam said, his voice steady. "The only way to know for sure is a DNA test, just a cheek swab." Jake stood abruptly, grabbing his backpack. "I don't need a test. I know who I am." "Don't you want to be sure?" Liam pressed. "If I'm wrong, I'll leave you alone. But if I'm right—" Jake hesitated, his fingers brushing the silver necklace. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. But after this, you're done." The clinic was quiet, the air filled with the sterile smell of disinfectant. The procedure was simple: 2 cheek swabs and a stack of forms to sign. Now they sat in the waiting room, the tension between them palpable. Jake slouched in his seat, staring at the floor, while Liam's leg bounced nervously. The clock ticked loudly, each second dragging. Finally, the lab technician appeared with an envelope. Liam's hands trembled as he opened it. His eyes scanned the clinical language until they landed on the conclusion: 99.9% probability of biological relation. Liam's breath caught. Jake was Michael's twin. He dialed Sarah immediately. "It's true," he said, his voice breaking. "Jake is Michael's brother." On the other end, Sarah sobbed. "How did this happen, Liam? How could they have been separated?" Across the room, Jake's expression hardened as he watched Liam. When Liam handed him the results, Jake crumpled the paper. "This is garbage," he said bitterly. "You just want me to be your replacement son." "That's not what this is about," Liam said, his voice calm but firm. "This is about the truth." Jake's voice rose. "You think a piece of paper makes us family? I don't need your pity or your answers." He yanked the silver necklace off and threw it at Liam's feet. "Keep it! I don't want it!" Before Liam could stop him, Jake stormed out of the clinic. Liam bent down, picking up the necklace, the weight of it heavy in his hand. The answers he'd fought so hard to uncover had only driven Jake further away. Liam sat in the quiet of his patrol car, staring at the silver necklace now resting in his palm. The chill of the metal seemed to seep into his skin, a tangible reminder of everything he had lost and everything he was still fighting to hold on to. Jake's words replayed in his mind, each one a sharp blade of rejection and pain. He couldn't blame the boy for his reaction. The revelation had been overwhelming and Liam had pushed too hard, too fast, but he couldn't give up, not now, not with the truth so close to being fully unraveled. Back home, Sarah was waiting by the window when he returned. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from hours of crying. Liam entered the house quietly, the necklace still clutched in his hand. He placed it on the kitchen table between them, the small Celtic knot glinting under the soft glow of the overhead light. Sarah reached for it, her fingers trembling as she ran them over the familiar design. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the situation pressing down on them like a heavy fog. Finally, Sarah broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do we do now, Liam? He doesn't want anything to do with us." Liam exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't just walk away. He's Michael's brother, Sarah. He's our family, whether he believes it or not." Sarah nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I can't stop thinking about how this happened. How could they take Michael's brother and separate them? There has to be more to this, Liam. More than just a mistake." The fire of determination in her voice reignited something in Liam. He reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Then we'll find out. Together." The next morning, Liam returned to the hospital with Sarah by his side. St. Mary's Medical Center was busy, the hum of activity creating a stark contrast to the quiet turmoil in their hearts. They approached the records office, presenting their request to a clerk who looked unimpressed by their urgency. After an agonizing wait, they were escorted to a small room where an older woman with a kind but tired expression sat behind a desk piled with folders. Her name tag read, "Patricia, Records Specialist." Liam explained the situation, his voice steady but urgent. He spoke of the adoption, the bracelet marked Baby A, and the possibility of a twin. Patricia frowned, her hands pausing over her keyboard. "That's a lot to unpack," she said, her voice careful. "Hospital records from 16 years ago are archived, but if there was a mix-up or unusual circumstances, it might take some time to track down." "We'll wait," Sarah said firmly, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Hours passed as Patricia dug through digital and physical files. Finally, she returned with a manila folder, her expression unreadable. She placed it on the desk and opened it carefully. "This is the file for Baby A," she said, her voice soft. "It matches your son's date of birth and adoption records, but there's also a record for Baby B." She paused, looking up at them. "It appears the twins were separated shortly after birth due to a clerical error. Baby B was initially listed as deceased, but that record was later corrected. By then, Baby A had already been placed with your family, and Baby B was sent into the foster system." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Liam sat back heavily, his mind reeling. "How could this happen?" he demanded, his voice low but furious. "How could a mistake like this go unnoticed for 16 years? Patricia shook her head, genuine sorrow in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. This shouldn't have happened. It looks like Baby B was never properly matched back to your family after the error was corrected. By the time the mistake was discovered, the adoption process for Baby A was finalized, and Baby B had already been placed in a different system." Liam felt a mixture of anger and devastation as he absorbed the information. "Do you know who was responsible?" he asked, his voice tight. "Someone needs to be held accountable." Patricia hesitated, then slid another document across the desk. "The staff involved are no longer with the hospital, but their names are listed here. I wish I could do more." Sarah leaned forward, her voice trembling. "This is enough. Thank you. They left the hospital in silence, the weight of the truth pressing down on them. Back in the car, Sarah turned to Liam, her eyes filled with tears. "We have to tell Jake," she said softly. "He deserves to know everything." Liam nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "If I can find him," he said. "I don't know where he's gone." Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "We will find him, Liam, and when we do, we'll make him understand that he's not alone anymore." Hours turned into days as Liam searched for Jake. He retraced his steps, revisiting the diner, the alley behind Murphy's Hardware, and St. Mark's Church. Each time he came up empty. Jake had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Liam's frustration grew, but he refused to give up. Finally, on a cold, gray afternoon, he spotted Jake near a skate park on the edge of town. The boy was sitting alone on a bench, his hood pulled up against the wind. Liam approached cautiously, his hands visible to show he meant no harm. Jake looked up as he neared, his expression wary but less hostile than before. "What do you want now?" he asked, his voice tired. "I found out the truth," Liam said gently. "About the hospital, about the adoption. I need you to hear this, Jake. Please." Jake hesitated, then gestured for Liam to sit down. "Fine. Say what you need to say." As Liam recounted the story, he watched Jake's face closely. The boy's guarded expression slowly cracked, his eyes betraying a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. When Liam finished, Jake sat in silence, staring at the ground. "So what?" Jake said finally, his voice barely audible. "You think this changes anything? I've been on my own my whole life. I don't need a family now." "You might not think you need us," Liam said, his voice steady. "But we need you, Jake. You're Michael's brother, you're part of us, whether you like it or not." Jake looked away, his jaw clenched tightly. After a long pause, he muttered, "I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to decide anything right now," Liam said. "Just give us a chance, that's all I'm asking." Jake didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. For Liam, it was enough for now. The cold wind brushed against Liam's face as he sat beside Jake, neither of them speaking for a long while. The hum of skateboard wheels and the occasional shout from kids in the park were the only sounds around them. Jake stayed hunched over, his elbows on his knees, staring down at the cracked pavement. Liam didn't press him. He knew better than to push when the boy was so clearly struggling with everything he'd just heard. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "You said Michael. He was my brother." His voice was quiet, almost drowned out by the wind. "What was he like?" Liam's throat tightened. Of all the questions Jake could have asked, this was the one that hit hardest. He was everything you'd want in a son," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. "Kind, stubborn, funny. He loved baseball and fishing trips, hated vegetables. He had this way of lighting up a room just by walking into it." Jake shifted slightly, his hands fidgeting. Did he ever talk about having a brother?" Liam paused, then shook his head. "Number. He didn't know. We didn't know. If we had..." He stopped, unable to finish the thought. Jake's fingers found the edge of his hoodie, twisting the fabric nervously. "And you think he'd want me in your life? After all this time?" Liam turned to face him fully. "Jake, I know he would. Michael believed in family. He'd want us to be there for you, just like he would have been if he were here." Jake swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as he fought back whatever emotions were clawing their way to the surface. I'm not good at this," he muttered. "At people, at family." "You don't have to be perfect," Liam said gently. "You just have to let us in." Jake didn't respond, but Liam saw the faintest glimmer of hope in his eyes. He stood, brushing off his jeans. "I should go," Jake said abruptly, grabbing his backpack. "I need to think." Liam nodded, stepping back to give him space. Take all the time you need. But if you ever want to talk or just need someone, you know where to find me." Jake hesitated for a moment, then nodded before walking away. Liam watched him disappear into the distance, his heart heavy but cautiously optimistic. When Liam returned home, Sarah was waiting by the fireplace, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. She looked up as he walked in, her eyes searching his face. "Did you find him?" she asked softly. "I did," Liam said, sinking into the chair across from her. "I told him everything, about the hospital, Michael, the adoption, all of it." "And?" Sarah prompted, leaning forward. "He listened. I think he wants to believe it, but he's scared. I don't blame him. This is a lot to take in." Liam rubbed his temples, exhaustion weighing on him. "He didn't reject it outright, though. That's something." Sarah reached across the small table and took his hand. "It's more than something, Liam. It's a start." The next few days passed in a blur. Liam returned to his usual routine at the station, though his mind was rarely on his work. Every time his phone buzzed, his heart jumped, hoping it was Jake. But there was nothing. No calls, no messages. The silence gnawed at him, but he reminded himself that Jake needed time. Then, one evening, as Liam and Sarah were finishing dinner, there was a knock at the door. They exchanged a glance before Liam stood and walked to the entryway. When he opened the door, Jake was standing there, his hoodie pulled tight around his face, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Can I come in?" Jake asked, his voice hesitant. Liam stepped aside, his chest tightening with a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. "Of course. Come on in." Jake entered the house slowly, his eyes darting around as if he were trying to take in every detail at once. Sarah appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Hi, Jake," she said softly. "Hi," Jake replied, his voice barely audible. "Are you hungry?" Sarah asked after a moment. "We just finished eating, but there's plenty left if you'd like something." Jake nodded, looking down at his shoes. "Yeah, sure." Sarah smiled gently. "Go ahead and sit. I'll heat up a plate." Jake followed Liam into the living room and sank into the couch, his backpack resting at his feet. He looked smaller somehow, his usual defiance tempered by uncertainty. Liam sat across from him, giving him space but staying close enough to show he was there. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," Liam said carefully, "but I'm glad you did." Jake shrugged. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he admitted. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. About Michael, about the hospital. It's all so messed up." "It is," Liam agreed. "And I'm so sorry for what you've been through, Jake. If I could go back and change things, I would in a heartbeat." Jake looked up at him, his eyes full of questions. Do you think Michael would have liked me?" Liam's chest tightened. "I know he would have. You're his brother, Jake. That's all that would have mattered to him." Jake's lips twitched into the faintest smile before he quickly looked away. Sarah returned with a plate of food, setting it in front of him. "Take your time," she said gently, stepping back to give him space. Jake stared at the plate for a moment before picking up the fork. He ate slowly, his movements careful, as if he were still trying to process everything. Liam and Sarah didn't push, letting him take the lead. After dinner, Jake stood and slung his backpack over his shoulder. "Thanks for the food," he said awkwardly. "Jake," Liam said, stopping him before he reached the door. "You don't have to leave. You can stay here if you want, as long as you need." Jake hesitated, his fingers tightening on the strap of his backpack. For a moment, it seemed like he might refuse, but then he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll stay." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she smiled at him. "Welcome home, Jake." The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Liam felt like they were on the right path. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would rebuild the family they had almost lost forever. The weight of the evidence sprawled across Liam's desk was both satisfying and infuriating. He traced each line of the financial records with a red pen, circling connections that painted a clear picture of corruption. Despite the arrests of lower-level employees, the masterminds, those who had orchestrated the illegal adoptions and stolen lives, remained elusive. Liam's eyes darted to the photos Rebecca had taken during the raid. Dimly lit offices with filing cabinets emptied in haste, stacks of old forms hastily shoved into boxes. He could almost feel the ghosts of the children who had passed through those doors, lives altered forever. His phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. It was Sarah. "Liam, you need to come home," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "It's Jake. He found something." Liam was out the door before she could explain further. The drive home felt longer than usual, his mind racing with possibilities. When he arrived, Sarah met him at the door, her face pale. "He's in Michael's room," she said softly. Jake was sitting on the floor of the room that had once belonged to his twin, holding a small, weathered box. His face was unreadable as he turned over a photo in his hands. "This was his, wasn't it?" Jake asked without looking up. The photo showed Michael sitting on the edge of a lake, a fishing pole in his hands, and the silver necklace gleaming against his chest. Liam crouched down beside him. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That was the summer we went to Lake Murray. He caught the biggest fish of the trip, bragged about it for weeks." Jake managed a small smile, though his eyes stayed fixed on the photo. "I should have been there," he said after a long pause. His voice was heavy with regret. "I should have been in that photo." Liam's chest tightened. "You didn't choose this, Jake. None of this is your fault." Jake set the photo back in the box and stared at the necklace in his hand. "I've spent my whole life wondering why I was left behind, why I didn't matter enough for anyone to keep me." He looked up at Liam, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and vulnerability. "And now I find out I wasn't just abandoned, I was stolen." Liam reached out, resting a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You mattered, Jake. You always mattered. And you still do. We're here now, and we're not going anywhere." Jake nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the necklace. "I want to help," he said finally, "with the investigation. If these people took me, they took other kids too. We need to stop them." Liam's heart swelled with pride. "We'll do it together." That night, Jake joined Liam at the dining table, helping to sort through files and documents. Sarah brought them coffee and sat nearby, her quiet presence a steadying force. For the first time, Liam felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the case, but for the family they were rebuilding. The following morning, Liam returned to the station with renewed determination. Rebecca was already waiting for him, a stack of new evidence in hand. "You're not going to believe this," she said, spreading out the papers. "I found a lead on a potential whistleblower, someone who worked directly with Charles Wentworth." The name was Jane McAllister, a former accountant for Wentworth's foundation. Rebecca had tracked her down to a small town 2 hours away, living under a new name. "She left the foundation abruptly in 2005, Rebecca explained. "Sources say she had a falling out with Wentworth over some of his business practices. If anyone knows where the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking, it's her." Liam didn't hesitate. "Let's go." The drive to the small coastal town was tense. Rebecca filled the silence with details about McAllister's work at the foundation, discrepancies in financial reports, untraceable transfers, and sudden, unexplained terminations of employees who asked too many questions. "She might be scared," Rebecca warned. "Wentworth has a long reach." When they arrived at McAllister's modest bungalow, it took several knocks before the door creaked open. A weary-looking woman in her late 40s peered out, her eyes narrowing at the sight of them. "Who are you and what do you want?" she asked sharply. "Ms. McAllister, I'm Officer Liam Matthews, and this is Rebecca Hayes from the Daily Chronicle," Liam said, holding up his badge. "We're investigating Charles Wentworth and the New Beginnings Adoption Agency. We believe you might have information that could help us." McAllister's expression shifted from suspicion to something closer to fear. I don't know what you're talking about, she said quickly, starting to close the door. Please, Liam said, stepping forward. Children's lives were destroyed because of what happened at that agency. My sons were separated. One of them grew up on the streets while the other— His voice caught. The other didn't make it. We just want the truth. McAllister hesitated, her hand on the doorframe. You're Michael's father, she said softly, recognition dawning in her eyes. I heard about him. I'm so sorry. Then help us, Rebecca urged. Help us make this right. After a long pause, McAllister opened the door fully. Come in. Inside, she shared her story, her voice trembling at times. Wentworth always claimed he was helping people, giving unwanted children better lives, but it was all about money. Families paid thousands to adopt, and twins were particularly valuable. If one family couldn't afford both, they'd split them up and sell the second twin to someone else. Her voice broke as she continued. When I found out, I threatened to go to the authorities. Wentworth told me if I did, I'd regret it. I believed him. I left everything behind. Do you have proof? Liam asked. McAllister nodded, standing and retrieving a locked box from a closet. Inside were ledgers, emails, and handwritten notes detailing years of illegal activity. I've kept this hidden for years, she said. If this gets out, he'll come after me. But if it can help those families, then it's worth it. Liam and Rebecca exchanged a determined glance. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Liam and Rebecca carefully transported Jane McAllister's box of evidence back to the station, treating it like the fragile key to justice that it was. On the way, Rebecca called her editor, updating them on the story's developments. Liam, on the other hand, was silent, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as his mind raced. This could finally be it, the evidence to dismantle Charles Wentworth's entire operation. Back at the station, they spread the contents of the box across a large table in the conference room. Liam called in 2 trusted colleagues, officers who had worked on complex fraud cases, to assist in organizing and verifying the documents. The ledgers detailed every financial transaction Jane had mentioned: money funneled through shell companies, payments to hospital staff, and names of families involved in the adoptions. There were also emails from Wentworth, some veiled in corporate jargon but others openly instructing subordinates to handle potential whistleblowers. Look at this, Rebecca said, pointing to a list of names in one of the ledgers. These are payments made directly to Robert Dawson, the hospital administrator Helen Carter mentioned. He was the one falsifying birth records. Liam leaned in, his jaw tightening as he recognized the dates. These coincide exactly with Jake and Michael's birth. That's the link we've been missing. Another document revealed a payment to Dr. James Morrison, the same doctor who had declared many of the deceased twins. The dates and amounts lined up with the fake death certificates, further solidifying the pattern of corruption. The pieces were falling into place, and with each one, the scope of Wentworth's operation became more staggering. Rebecca tapped her pen against her notepad. This isn't just about Jake and Michael. This is a nationwide scandal. Dozens of families, maybe more, were affected by this. Liam nodded grimly. And Wentworth profited from every single one of them. As night fell, Sarah arrived at the station with Jake. She had insisted they come, knowing how deeply invested Jake was in uncovering the truth. Jake approached the table hesitantly, his eyes scanning the array of papers and files. When he saw his and Michael's names on one of the documents, his face darkened. They sold me, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Like I was property. Sarah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You're more than that, Jake. You've always been more. Liam stepped around the table, meeting Jake's eyes. This wasn't your fault. None of it. And we're going to make sure they pay for what they did to you. And to all the others. Jake nodded, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. What do we do now? Liam took a deep breath. Now we take this to the district attorney. The next morning, Liam sat across from the district attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Angela Cortez. The evidence was laid out between them, and she methodically examined each document and photograph, her sharp eyes narrowing as she read. "This is damning," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. "With Jane McAllister's testimony and these documents, we have enough to file charges against Charles Wentworth and his associates, but we'll need to move fast before they try to disappear." "Agreed," Liam said. "Can we secure warrants for his arrest and his properties?" "I'll get a judge on it immediately," Cortez replied, already picking up her phone. By midday, a team of officers, including Liam, assembled outside Wentworth's estate. The mood was tense but determined. Liam briefed the group, emphasizing the need to secure all electronic devices, financial records, and personal correspondence. "This is our chance to bring him down," he said. "Let's do it right." The gates opened under the force of a warrant, and the team surged onto the property. Wentworth, dressed impeccably as always, greeted them in the grand foyer with feigned composure. "This is an outrage," he said, his voice dripping with indignation. "I'll have my lawyer here within the hour." Liam stepped forward, holding up the warrant. "Charles Wentworth, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and crimes against children. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." For the first time, Wentworth's mask slipped. His face paled as two officers cuffed him, and he was led out of the house under the watchful eyes of his stunned staff. The search of the estate yielded even more damning evidence. Hidden safes contained large sums of cash, false adoption papers, and encrypted hard drives that the department's tech team quickly began decoding. Each discovery painted a clearer picture of the vast network Wentworth had orchestrated, one that exploited vulnerable families for profit. That evening, Liam returned home exhausted but victorious. Sarah and Jake were waiting for him in the living room, their faces full of hope. "It's done," Liam said, sinking into the couch beside them. "Wentworth is in custody, and we have everything we need to take this to trial." Jake's expression was a mix of relief and disbelief. "So it's over? Just like that?" "It's not over yet," Liam said, placing a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "But this is the beginning of the end. And no matter what happens, you're not alone in this." Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "We're with you, Jake, every step of the way." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jake allowed himself to relax. He leaned back into the couch, the weight of the past 16 years slowly lifting. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for now, he was home. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media coverage, and emotional highs and lows for the Matthews family. The case against Charles Wentworth became the headline story in every major news outlet, the details of his crimes shocking even the most hardened reporters. Rebecca Hayes's exposé continued to circulate widely, prompting more families to come forward with their own stories of adoption fraud and stolen children. At the Matthews house, life began to settle into a cautious rhythm. Jake was adjusting to his new surroundings, though it was clear the transition wasn't always easy for him. Some nights, Sarah would find him sitting on the porch, staring up at the stars, the silver necklace clenched tightly in his hand. She'd sit with him, not saying much, just letting him know he wasn't alone. One evening, as the trial date for Wentworth approached, Jake asked Sarah a question that caught her off guard. "Do you think Michael would have liked me?" Sarah's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. "I know he would have, Jake," she said softly. "He was always so kind, so open-hearted. He would have been thrilled to have a brother like you." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on the night sky. "Sometimes I feel like I've stolen his place." Sarah reached over, gently taking his hand. "You haven't stolen anything. Michael's place in our hearts is his, just as yours is yours. There's room for both of you." Jake didn't respond right away, but after a long silence, he whispered, "Thanks, Mom." Sarah's breath caught at the word and tears filled her eyes. She squeezed his hand tightly, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The day of the trial arrived, and Liam prepared himself for what promised to be an intense and emotionally charged proceeding. Charles Wentworth's legal team had pulled every string they could, trying to delay or discredit the evidence, but the mountain of proof was undeniable. Jane McAllister, Helen Carter, and Margaret Long all testified, their accounts painting a damning picture of Wentworth's operation. Liam sat in the courtroom beside Sarah and Jake, his presence steady and grounding. Jake watched intently as the witnesses spoke, his expression a mix of anger and determination. When it was Jane's turn to take the stand, she held her head high, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "I worked for Charles Wentworth for 6 years," Jane began, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "During that time, I witnessed countless financial transactions tied to illegal adoptions. Children were treated as commodities, separated from their families, and sold to the highest bidder. I stayed silent out of fear, but I'm here today to tell the truth." Her testimony, combined with the evidence she had provided, proved pivotal. As the trial continued, more families testified, sharing heartbreaking stories of stolen children, false death certificates, and years of searching for answers. The sheer scope of the corruption was staggering. Jake watched each family with a sense of solidarity. Their pain mirrored his own, their stories echoing the loss and confusion he had lived with for so long. He realized he wasn't alone, not in his pain, and not in his journey toward healing. When the verdict was finally announced, the courtroom was packed. Charles Wentworth sat stoically, his composed exterior betraying none of the tension that surely gripped him. The judge read the charges one by one, each followed by a single, powerful word: guilty. A collective gasp swept through the room as the final charge was read, sealing Wentworth's fate. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his empire dismantled, and his reputation irreparably destroyed. Liam exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to Jake, who sat motionless, staring straight ahead. "It's over," Liam said softly. "You did it." Jake finally turned to face him, his eyes glistening. "We did it," he said. For the first time, there was a sense of closure in his voice. In the months that followed, the Matthews family worked to build a new normal. Jake enrolled in a GED program, with Sarah tutoring him on the weekends. He began volunteering at a local youth shelter, determined to help kids who were going through what he once had. His guitar became a constant companion, the music filling the house with warmth and life. Liam found himself spending more time at home, cherishing every moment with his family. One evening, he and Jake sat together in the garage, strumming their guitars in harmony. The melody was simple, but it spoke of healing and connection, an unspoken bond between father and son. As the seasons changed, so did Jake. He smiled more, laughed more, and let himself imagine a future full of possibilities. He knew the scars of his past would never fully fade, but surrounded by the love and support of his new family, he felt ready to face whatever came next. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Jake stood with Liam and Sarah at Michael's grave. The headstone was simple, adorned with fresh flowers, and a small photo of Michael smiling brightly. Jake placed the silver necklace at the base of the headstone, his fingers lingering on the cool metal. "I wish I could have known you," Jake said quietly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I promise, I'll honor you. I'll live a life you'd be proud of." Liam placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, while Sarah wiped away silent tears. Together, they stood in the gentle sunlight, a family united by love, loss, and the unwavering bond of truth. Liam leaned back in his chair, staring at the investigation board pinned with photos, documents, and timelines. Each string connecting the pieces of Jake's past seemed to lead to another question, another layer of deception. The story of what had happened to Jake, and so many other children, was almost complete, but gaps still remained. His mind churned with possibilities as he tried to reconcile the mystery of Jake's separation from Michael. Sarah's voice on the phone brought him back to the present. "How are you holding up?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Making progress, but there's still so much we don't know. Someone went to a lot of trouble to keep Jake hidden. I can't stop thinking about why. Why him? Why separate the twins in the first place?" Sarah's voice softened. "You'll figure it out, Liam. You always do. Just remember, we're here for Jake now, and that's what matters." Rebecca entered the station, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She placed one on Liam's desk with a supportive smile. The public response is incredible. Families are reaching out to share their stories. It's all thanks to the investigation and the article. Liam nodded, grateful but exhausted. "We've made progress, but we're not done. Somewhere in this mess is the truth Jake deserves." He added another document to the board and stepped back to study the growing web. As he stared at the tangled connections, a thought struck him. There was one lead they hadn't fully explored: the original records from the fire that had marked the beginning of Jake's traumatic journey. Determined, he grabbed his coat and headed out to follow up on the last remaining pieces of the puzzle. That evening, Jake sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of cocoa. The room was quiet, except for the soft murmur of Sarah washing dishes and Liam flipping through old files. Jake hesitated before speaking, his voice low and uncertain. "I get these flashes sometimes." Liam and Sarah turned toward him, their expressions full of encouragement. "Flashes?" Liam asked. "Yeah," Jake said, staring into his mug. "Mostly at night. I see smoke, thick and black. I hear someone crying. Then there's this face. An old woman with kind eyes. She's holding me, running through the dark." His hands tightened around the mug as the memories played out in his mind. After that, everything's a blur. Different faces, different homes. But that necklace? He touched the silver pendant at his throat. "It's the only thing that's been with me through it all. Ethel said it would protect me until I found where I belonged." Sarah reached across the table, her hand gently covering his. "And now? Do you feel like you belong somewhere?" Jake looked up, meeting her gaze. For the first time, his expression softened. "Yeah, I think I do. Being here, learning about Michael, it feels like I've found a part of myself I didn't even know was missing." Later that night, Jake stood in the doorway of Michael's room. The space was untouched, a time capsule of his twin's life. Model airplanes dangled from the ceiling, their paint faded but pristine. Sports trophies lined the shelves, and a guitar rested in the corner, its strings slightly dusty. Jake stepped inside, his movement slow and reverent, as though entering sacred ground. He reached for a photo on the nightstand, its frame polished and familiar. Michael's face stared back at him, the same smile and eyes that greeted him in the mirror each day. Jake's voice was quiet as he spoke. "It's strange. I never knew him, but I feel connected to everything in here." Liam and Sarah stood in the doorway, watching as Jake gently ran his fingers along the spine of a book, then over the surface of a baseball mitt. Finally, he picked up the guitar, strumming a chord that resonated softly in the still room. "When I play," he said, his voice gaining strength, "it feels like he's still here, like he's not completely gone." Sarah wiped away a tear, stepping forward. "He's not gone, Jake. He's here with us, in you." Jake set the guitar back down and turned to face them. His shoulders were squared, his voice steady. "I want to know everything, about the fire, the agency, what happened to me. Even if it hurts, I need to understand." He touched the necklace at his throat, its weight both grounding and empowering him. "I'm not running anymore." Liam stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "Whatever we find, we'll face it together." "Together," Jake agreed. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves as Liam and Jake made their way through the cemetery. The crunch of leaves underfoot echoed in the still air, matching their solemn pace. Jake's heart thudded as they approached Michael's headstone. The granite marker stood simple and unadorned, a fresh bouquet of flowers placed neatly in its holder. Liam knelt beside the grave, brushing away stray leaves. His voice was quiet, filled with love. "Your brother loved baseball. He practiced every day, determined to make varsity. And he did, sophomore year. The coach said he'd never seen someone so dedicated." Jake knelt beside Liam, his fingers lightly tracing Michael's name on the stone. The silver necklace caught the sunlight, its gleam a silent connection between the brothers. Liam continued, his voice heavy with emotion. Michael always stood up for people. There was this kid at school, bullied constantly. Michael stepped in, even though the bullies were twice his size. Came home with a black eye but said it was worth it. Jake listened intently, absorbing every word. Each story painted a vivid picture of the brother he never knew, but felt so deeply connected to. "I wish I could have known him," Jake said softly. He placed his hand on the cool stone, his voice growing stronger. Fateo3856@goler.com. But I promise, Michael, I'll live a life that would have made you proud. I'll work hard. I'll take care of Mom and Dad. And I'll help others, just like you did. Liam wrapped an arm around Jake's shoulders, pulling him close. They sat there for a long time, father and son, united in their grief and their hope. When they finally stood to leave, the weight on their hearts felt lighter. Jake glanced back one last time, the sunlight glinting off the necklace as it swayed gently against his chest. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was one they would walk together, guided by the memory of the brother who had brought them home. The courthouse was packed, every seat in the gallery filled with families, reporters, and curious onlookers. Jake sat between Sarah and Rebecca, his hands gripping the silver necklace that hung around his neck. Across the room, Liam stood at the witness stand, his police badge gleaming in the fluorescent light. The prosecutor paced slowly, her voice calm but deliberate. "Officer Matthews, please tell the court about your investigation into New Horizons Adoption Agency." Liam's voice was steady, though the weight of the case pressed on his shoulders. "During the course of my investigation, I uncovered extensive fraud spanning more than 2 decades. The agency, under Charles Wentworth's direction, deliberately separated siblings, falsified birth and death records, and exploited vulnerable families for profit." At the defense table, Charles Wentworth sat rigid, his lawyer scribbling frantically on a yellow pad. Wentworth's expensive suit and air of composure couldn't mask the tension in his body. The prosecutor turned to the jury, holding up a document. "Officer Matthews, can you confirm the authenticity of this ledger?" Liam nodded. "Yes. It details payments made to hospital administrators and adoption facilitators, all tied to the illegal separation of twins, including Jake and Michael Matthews." A quiet murmur spread through the gallery. Sarah squeezed Jake's hand, her expression a mixture of sorrow and determination. The prosecution's next witness was Rebecca Hayes. Her testimony was sharp and precise, outlining the financial records she had uncovered and the timeline of payments that coincided with illegal adoptions. "These documents prove Mr. Wentworth profited personally from these adoptions," Rebecca said, her voice firm. "The agency charged exorbitant fees to adoptive families while falsifying the deaths of infants to cover their tracks." Finally, Margaret Long took the stand, her hands trembling slightly but her voice unwavering. "I was a foster home coordinator for New Horizons," she began, her gaze steady despite the weight of her words. "We were instructed to report the fire as an accident, but it wasn't. It was set to destroy records, evidence of what they were doing." Margaret's voice broke as she continued. "Jake and Michael were intentionally separated. The agency knew they were twins, but they lied. They marked Michael as adopted and Jake as deceased to maximize their profits." Gasps filled the courtroom, and Jake felt tears sting his eyes. Sarah leaned into him, her hand gripping his tightly. The trial stretched over several days, with evidence piling against Charles Wentworth and his accomplices. Each new testimony and document revealed more about the agency's systemic corruption. The defense tried to discredit the witnesses, painting them as unreliable, but the evidence was overwhelming. On the final day of testimony, Liam was called back to the stand. The prosecutor addressed him directly. "Officer Matthews, after months of investigation, what is your conclusion about the actions of Charles Wentworth and New Horizons?" Liam's voice was resolute. "They exploited children and families for financial gain. They tore families apart, falsified records, and left countless lives in ruin. But today, we have the chance to hold them accountable and to begin the process of justice for the victims. The jury deliberated for hours, the tension in the courtroom thick as they returned with the verdict. Everyone held their breath as the foreman stood, the silence almost deafening. In the matter of the state versus Charles Wentworth, on the count of criminal conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. The foreman continued reading each charge: fraud, falsification of records, endangerment of minors, and with each guilty, the room seemed to exhale relief. Jake felt Sarah's arm wrap around his shoulders as tears streamed down her face. Liam reached for Jake's hand, gripping it tightly. Wentworth sat motionless, his once arrogant demeanor crumbling under the weight of the verdicts. When the gavel struck, signaling the end of the trial, the gallery erupted into applause. Families hugged, some weeping openly. Margaret Long smiled through her tears, nodding toward Liam in gratitude. Jake stood, his legs shaky, his emotions overwhelming. "It's over," he whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "It's over," Liam confirmed, pulling Jake into a tight embrace. The days after the trial were a blur of interviews, thank yous, and quiet moments of reflection for the Matthews family. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Jake looked up from his plate, his voice soft. "Do you think Michael would have forgiven them?" Liam and Sarah exchanged a glance. Liam spoke first. "Michael always believed in second chances, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means finding peace for yourself." Jake nodded, digesting the thought. "I think I want to try. Not for them, but for me." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "That's a brave choice, Jake. And we're here to help you, every step of the way." Weeks later, the Matthews family gathered in their backyard for a celebration. The yard was decorated with twinkling lights and colorful banners, and the air buzzed with laughter and conversation. Friends, neighbors, and those who had supported them through their journey filled the space. Jake sat on a wooden stool in the center of the yard, Michael's guitar resting on his knee. He adjusted the microphone, his fingers brushing the strings as he spoke. "This song is for my brother Michael," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "And for everyone who's helped me find my way home." As he played, the melody carried a mix of pain, healing, and hope. His voice rang clear in the cool evening air, and the crowd listened in rapt silence. Sarah leaned into Liam, her tears falling freely. Liam wrapped an arm around her, his own eyes misty as he watched their son. When the song ended, the applause was deafening. Jake smiled, ducking his head shyly as he stood and stepped off the stool. He made his way to Sarah and Liam, who embraced him tightly. The silver necklace glinted under the string lights, a constant reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment. That night, as the party wound down, Jake sat on the porch steps, looking up at the stars. Liam joined him, handing over a mug of cocoa. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Jake spoke. "I think I finally get it," he said quietly. "Get what?" Liam asked, his tone gentle. "What family means. It's not just where you're born or who raises you. It's the people who choose to stay, no matter what." Liam smiled, resting a hand on Jake's shoulder. "And we'll always choose you, son." Jake looked over, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I'll always choose you too, Dad." The stars above seemed to shine brighter as they sat together, the weight of the past giving way to the promise of a future filled with love, hope, and belonging. Jake sat on the porch long after Liam went inside, the silver necklace resting against his chest, its cool weight grounding him. The stars above seemed infinite, scattered across the dark sky, and for the first time in his life, they didn't feel out of reach. He traced the outline of the Celtic knot pendant, thinking about everything it had witnessed: his struggles, his survival, his search for belonging. Now, it felt less like a reminder of what he'd lost and more like a symbol of what he'd found. The next morning, the Matthews house was alive with movement. Sarah stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease, while Liam read the newspaper, his coffee steaming nearby. Jake entered the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," Sarah said, her voice bright. "I made your favorite, blueberry pancakes." Jake grinned. "Thanks, Mom." The word still felt new on his tongue, but it carried a warmth he couldn't quite put into words. He grabbed a plate and sat at the table, watching Liam carefully fold the paper. "What's the plan for today?" Jake asked between bites. Liam set his mug down, a mischievous smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Thought we'd take a little trip. There's something I want to show you." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Mysterious? Should I be worried?" Sarah laughed. "Only if you're afraid of surprises. Finish up and get ready. It'll be worth it." An hour later, they were driving along winding country roads, the autumn leaves painting the landscape in fiery reds and oranges. Jake sat in the passenger seat, the window cracked just enough to let the crisp air in. Liam navigated with confidence, occasionally glancing at Jake with a knowing look. Eventually, they pulled into the gravel driveway of an old farmhouse. The building was modest but sturdy, its white paint slightly weathered. A wooden barn stood off to the side, its red walls bright against the clear blue sky. "What is this place?" Jake asked, stepping out of the car. Liam gestured for him to follow. "It belonged to your grandparents. They moved away years ago, but I've been keeping it up. Figured it was time you saw it." Jake's footsteps slowed as they approached the house. The air seemed to hum with history, as though the walls themselves held memories waiting to be uncovered. Inside, the house was simple but cozy. A faded rug covered the hardwood floor, and shelves lined with old books and knickknacks filled the living room. Liam led Jake upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. He pushed the door open, revealing a neatly kept space with a twin bed and a wooden desk. A window overlooked the barn and the fields beyond. "This was Michael's room when he stayed here in the summers," Liam said, his voice soft. "He loved it out here. Said it made him feel free." Jake stepped inside, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk. He noticed a stack of notebooks neatly arranged, their covers worn with use. He picked one up, flipping through pages filled with Michael's looping handwriting. "He liked to write?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with awe. "Stories, poems, sometimes just thoughts," Liam replied. "He was always dreaming up something new." Jake sat on the bed, holding the notebook in his hands. "I think I get why he loved this place," he said quietly. "It feels peaceful." Liam leaned against the doorframe, a small smile on his face. "It's yours, you know. If you ever need a place to think or just get away, this is your spot." Jake looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. "Really?" "Really," Liam said firmly. "Michael would have wanted you to have it." Over the next few weeks, Jake found himself returning to the farmhouse often. Sometimes he brought his guitar, strumming softly on the porch as the sun set. Other times he poured his thoughts into one of Michael's old notebooks, the pages filling with lyrics and sketches. He felt closer to his brother there, as though Michael's spirit lingered in the quiet corners of the house. One day, as he was exploring the barn, Jake found an old wooden box tucked away in the loft. Inside were faded photos of Liam as a boy, fishing poles and baseball bats scattered around him. There were also letters, long, heartfelt messages Michael had written but never sent. Jake sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, reading each letter carefully. They were addressed to no one in particular, almost like journal entries. In them, Michael wrote about his hopes, his fears, and his unwavering love for his family. In one letter, Michael wrote, "I hope someday I can do something that really matters, something that helps people. Dad always says the best way to honor the life you've been given is to make it count. I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I'll figure it out." Jake's chest tightened as he read the words. It felt like Michael was speaking directly to him, urging him to live with purpose. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box, a sense of resolve settling over him. The talent show ribbon Jake had left at Michael's grave had sparked conversations around town. Soon, Word of Jake's musical talent reached the local community center, and the director approached him about hosting a weekly music workshop for kids. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," Jake admitted to Sarah one evening as they discussed the offer. "Why not?" Sarah asked, her tone encouraging. "You've already inspired so many people with your story and your music. Imagine what you could do for those kids." Jake hesitated. "What if I mess it up? What if I'm not good enough?" Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her voice gentle. "Jake, those kids don't need perfect. They need someone who understands what it's like to struggle and still come out stronger. You've got that in spades." The first workshop was small, just 5 kids in a bright room with folding chairs and mismatched instruments. Jake felt nervous at first, but as the session progressed, he found his footing. The kids were eager to learn, their eyes lighting up as he showed them simple chords and rhythms. One girl, a shy 9-year-old named Ella, stayed after the workshop. She clutched an old ukulele, its strings frayed and out of tune. "Can you show me how to fix this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake knelt down, examining the ukulele. "It's seen better days, but I think we can make it work." As he tuned the instrument and replaced a string, he told her about Michael's guitar and how it had helped him find his voice. By the time he handed the ukulele back, Ella's face was glowing. Word spread quickly, and soon the workshops were full. Jake found himself teaching not just music, but lessons about perseverance, creativity, and the importance of finding your voice. Each week, he saw the kids grow more confident, their smiles a reminder of why he had said yes in the first place. One afternoon, after a particularly energetic session, Liam and Sarah arrived to pick Jake up. They watched from the doorway as he laughed with the kids, his guitar slung over his shoulder. "He's found his place," Sarah said softly, her eyes shining. Liam nodded, a deep sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Yeah, he has." Jake's workshops became more than just a weekly event. They turned into a vibrant community. Parents stayed to listen, the kids began performing small recitals, and local musicians volunteered their time to support the program. The community center buzzed with energy every Saturday afternoon, and Jake thrived in the role he had once doubted he could fill. One day, after the workshop ended, Ella approached Jake with a carefully folded piece of paper. Her face was flushed with excitement. "I wrote a song," she said, holding it out to him. Jake unfolded the paper, reading the simple yet heartfelt lyrics. "This is beautiful, Ella," he said, his voice full of encouragement. "Want to play it together next week?" Her eyes widened. "You mean, in front of everyone?" "Why not? It's your song. It deserves to be heard." The following Saturday, Ella stood nervously on stage with Jake by her side. Her ukulele looked small in her hands, but as she began to play, her voice grew strong and steady. The room erupted in applause when she finished, her shy smile beaming under the spotlight. The Matthews family's life settled into a rhythm, each day bringing new opportunities to heal and grow. Liam returned to the farmhouse with Jake one weekend, showing him how to repair a section of the barn roof. They worked side by side, the smell of sawdust and fresh air filling their lungs. "You're getting the hang of this," Liam said, handing Jake a hammer. "Thanks, Dad," Jake replied, the words flowing naturally now. He looked at the sturdy beams overhead and added, "I want to fix this place up. Make it something special." "What do you have in mind?" Liam asked, curious. Jake hesitated, but his eyes lit up with an idea. A retreat, for kids who need a safe space, music, art, nature, something like what you and Mom gave me. A place to feel free. Liam's chest swelled with pride. "I think Michael would have loved that idea." As winter approached, Jake continued to spend time at the farmhouse, transforming it little by little. Sarah joined him on weekends, painting the walls and organizing the rooms. She found a small box of Michael's old drawings in the attic, each one brimming with youthful imagination. "Maybe these could inspire the kids," Sarah suggested, holding up a colorful sketch of a treehouse. Jake smiled, taking the drawing. "Yeah, They should know they're part of something bigger. The farmhouse began to take on new life, its weathered exterior brightened by fresh coats of paint, its empty rooms filled with the hum of possibility. Local volunteers pitched in, and Rebecca Hayes wrote an article about Jake's vision, sparking donations and support from the community. One crisp January morning, Jake woke to the smell of pancakes wafting through the house. He found Liam at the stove, flipping a stack with practiced ease. "What's the occasion?" Jake asked, still groggy. "Thought we'd celebrate," Liam said, setting a plate in front of him. "You've got something to see?" Curious, Jake followed Liam outside after breakfast. A small crowd had gathered near the barn: Sarah, Ethel, Margaret Long, and a few of the kids from the music workshops. Ella held a handmade sign that read, "The Matthews Haven," in bold, colorful letters. Jake's jaw dropped. "What is this?" Sarah stepped forward, her smile wide. "It's your dream, Jake. The retreat is officially yours." Jake's eyes brimmed with tears as he turned to Liam. "You did this?" "We all did," Liam said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've inspired more people than you realize, son." Over the next several months, the Matthews Haven became a sanctuary for kids and families in need. The barn was converted into an arts and music studio, the farmhouse hosted workshops and overnight retreats, and the surrounding fields provided space for hiking and reflection. Jake led the programs with a passion that came naturally. He played guitar under the stars, taught kids how to plant wildflowers in the garden, and shared his story openly, showing them that healing was possible. One evening, as the retreat wrapped up for the day, Jake sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset. Liam joined him, handing over a cold bottle of soda. "You've built something amazing here," Liam said, his voice filled with pride. Jake took a sip, letting the words sink in. "I just wanted to give back, to make a difference, like Michael wanted to." Liam nodded, placing an arm around Jake's shoulders. "And you've done that, Jake. You've made him proud. You've made all of us proud." The following spring, the Matthews family returned to Michael's grave, this time with Ella and a group of kids from the retreat. Jake knelt by the headstone, his fingers brushing the engraved letters. "We've done a lot this year," Jake said softly. "And I couldn't have done it without you, Michael. You've been with me every step of the way." He placed a framed photo of the Matthews Haven beside the headstone. The picture showed the farmhouse in full bloom, surrounded by smiling kids and vibrant gardens. "This is for you," Jake whispered. "For us." Sarah and Liam stood behind him, their hands intertwined, watching as Jake shared this quiet moment with his brother. The kids gathered nearby, their laughter and chatter filling the air, a living testament to the legacy of hope and love the Matthews family had built. As they walked back to the car, Jake glanced up at the sky, where the sun shone brightly through scattered clouds. For the first time, he felt not just whole but limitless, ready to embrace whatever came next with the family he had finally found. Jake leaned against the car as they prepared to leave the cemetery, his fingers lightly touching the silver necklace at his throat. The framed photo of the Matthews Haven stood proud beside Michael's grave, a silent promise that his twin's memory would live on in the lives of others. Liam and Sarah gave Jake space, sensing the significance of this moment. Jake gazed at the headstone, his thoughts turning to the journey that had brought him here. It felt like a lifetime ago that he'd been scraping by on the streets, relying on nothing but his wits and that necklace. Now, he had a family, a purpose, and a connection he never thought possible. "I'll keep going, Michael," Jake murmured under his breath. "For both of us." Liam's voice broke the stillness. "Ready to head back, son?" Jake turned, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, let's go." Back at the Matthews Haven, the farmhouse was buzzing with activity. Volunteers were hard at work clearing brush from the fields to make room for a small amphitheater Jake had envisioned, a place where kids could perform their music and share their art. Sarah directed a group of teens painting a mural on the barn, while Ella helped arrange flower pots around the porch. Jake joined the crew building the amphitheater, rolling up his sleeves as he hauled lumber and hammered planks into place. The project felt like a physical manifestation of his journey, something rough and raw transforming into something beautiful. "You've got an eye for design," one of the volunteers said, admiring the blueprint Jake had drawn up. "Ever think about doing this full-time?" Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, grinning. "Never thought I'd be building anything at all, but this feels right." As the weeks turned into months, the amphitheater took shape. It became a gathering point for the community, a place where music and stories echoed under the open sky. The first event was a warm summer evening, the air alive with anticipation. Families and friends filled the wooden benches, their voices mingling in cheerful conversation as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jake stood backstage, his guitar slung across his shoulder. His palms were sweaty, his nerves jangling. Even after countless workshops and performances, this felt different, bigger. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had helped bring this vision to life. Liam appeared beside him, a steadying presence. "You've got this," he said, clapping Jake on the back. "Just go out there and be yourself." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath. When he stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces, catching glimpses of Sarah, Liam, Ethel, Margaret Long, and dozens of kids from the workshops. "This song is for everyone who's been part of this journey," Jake began, his voice steady. "It's about finding hope, even when it feels out of reach." His fingers moved across the guitar strings, and the first notes filled the amphitheater. The melody was both tender and triumphant, weaving together threads of loss, resilience, and love. As Jake sang, the audience leaned in, captivated by the raw emotion in his voice. When the final chord rang out, the crowd rose to their feet, their applause thunderous. Jake stood there, overwhelmed but smiling, as Sarah and Liam joined him on stage. They pulled him into a tight embrace, the silver necklace glinting under the stage lights. In the weeks following the performance, Jake threw himself into expanding the Matthews Haven. He partnered with local organizations to offer scholarships for kids to attend retreats and workshops, ensuring that cost wouldn't be a barrier. He started a mentorship program, pairing teens with volunteers who could help guide them through challenges both big and small. One day, while sorting through donations in the barn, Jake found an old cassette recorder tucked in a box of forgotten items. Curious, he dusted it off and pressed play. A grainy voice crackled through the speakers, Michael's voice. "Hey, Dad," the recording began. "I'm not sure when you'll hear this, but I wanted to say thank you for everything. I know I don't always show it, but I look up to you more than anyone. You taught me what it means to be strong, to care about others, to keep going even when it's hard." Jake's breath hitched as he listened, his chest tightening with emotion. Michael's voice was so alive, so clear, it felt like he was sitting right beside him. "And to Mom," Michael continued, "thank you for always believing in me, for showing me how to find the good in every situation, even when it's tough. I hope someday I can make you as proud of me as I am of you." The tape clicked off, leaving Jake sitting in silence. He clutched the recorder tightly, tears streaming down his face. Michael's words felt like a gift, a reminder of the bond they shared, even across time and loss. Later that evening, Jake gathered Liam and Sarah in the living room. He placed the cassette recorder on the coffee table and hesitated before pressing play. As Michael's voice filled the room, Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes wide with emotion. Liam sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the recorder. When the tape ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I forgot how much he sounded like you, Jake," she said softly, her voice trembling. Jake smiled through his tears. I think he left this for us, to remind us to keep going." Liam reached out, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You've done more than keep going, son. You've built something incredible. Something Michael would have been proud of." As the Matthews Haven grew, so did Jake's sense of purpose. He began hosting larger events, inviting musicians and artists from all over the region to perform and lead workshops. Each gathering brought new faces, new stories, and new connections. The farmhouse became a symbol of resilience and hope, its once-worn walls now alive with laughter and creativity. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Jake sat on the porch with Sarah and Liam. Fireflies danced in the twilight, their soft glow illuminating the faces of the kids playing nearby. "You've created something amazing here, Jake," Sarah said, her voice full of pride. Jake looked out at the scene before him, his heart full. "We all did. This is as much Michael's dream as it is mine." Liam nodded, raising his glass in a toast. To family, to hope, and to making every moment count. They clinked their glasses together, their bond stronger than ever, as the stars began to appear in the vast night sky. The quiet hum of cicadas filled the warm evening air as Jake sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the kids at the Matthews Haven chase each other through the firefly-speckled field. The glow of their laughter and joy reminded him of how far he'd come, how far they had all come. The farmhouse had transformed into a thriving hub of creativity and healing, a place where kids found a voice, a family, and a purpose. Liam and Sarah joined him on the porch, carrying mugs of tea. Liam handed one to Jake and settled into the rocking chair beside him, the wood creaking softly. "How does it feel?" Liam asked, nodding toward the scene in front of them. Jake took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle him. "It feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sarah smiled, sitting on Jake's other side. "You've turned this place into something extraordinary, Jake. Every child who comes here is a little better for it." Jake glanced down at the silver necklace around his neck, running his fingers over the intricate knot. "I just keep thinking about Michael," he said quietly. "All of this, it's what he would have wanted. I can feel him here, in the music, in the laughter. It's like he's guiding me." Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "He is," he said, "and he's not the only one. You've got your family right here, backing you every step of the way." Jake's smile widened, and for a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, soaking in the warmth of the moment. The stars began to appear, dotting the inky sky above the fields. The next morning, Jake was up early, preparing for a special event. It was the one-year anniversary of the Matthews Haven, and families from all over the community had been invited to celebrate. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables laden with food, arranging colorful decorations, and tuning instruments for the evening's performances. Ella arrived with her parents, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself. She ran up to Jake, her ukulele strapped to her back. "I wrote a new song," she announced, her face glowing with excitement. Jake knelt to her level. "I can't wait to hear it. You ready to play it tonight?" Ella nodded vigorously. "I practiced all week." "Then it's going to be amazing," Jake said with a grin, ruffling her hair. As the day progressed, the farmhouse and its grounds filled with people, kids who had attended workshops, their families, volunteers, and supporters. Margaret Long and Ethel Green arrived together, both beaming as they took in the bustling scene. Ethel caught Jake's eye and waved him over. "You've turned this place into something magical," she said, her voice full of pride. "It's everything I hoped you'd find when I gave you that necklace." Jake smiled, hugging her tightly. "Thank you, Ethel, for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." As dusk fell, the crowd gathered around the amphitheater, its wooden stage glowing under strings of lights. Jake stepped onto the stage, his guitar slung across his shoulder, and the crowd erupted in applause. He held up his hands to quiet them, his heart pounding as he looked out at the sea of faces. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady. "When we started the Matthews Haven, I had no idea it would grow into something this special. This isn't just a place for music or art. It's a place for connection, for hope, and I couldn't have done it without every single one of you." The audience cheered, and Jake glanced toward the front row, where Liam and Sarah sat side by side, their pride evident in their smiles. "This next song," Jake continued, "is for my brother Michael. He's the reason this place exists, and I like to think he's here with us tonight." He began to play, the familiar chords filling the amphitheater with a melody that was both haunting and uplifting. His voice carried through the cool night air, weaving a story of loss and redemption, of finding light in the darkest moments. When the song ended, the crowd was silent for a beat before erupting into applause. Jake stood, overwhelmed and humbled, as people rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Later that night, as the crowd began to disperse, Jake found himself standing at the edge of the field, looking up at the stars. Liam joined him, slipping a hand into his pocket. "Got something for you," Liam said, holding out a small box. Jake took it, his brows furrowing in curiosity. Inside was a simple but elegant pendant, engraved with the initials J and M, intertwined in a Celtic knot design. "It's for you and Michael," Liam explained, his voice thick with emotion. "A reminder that no matter where life takes you, he'll always be with you." Jake's throat tightened as he slipped the pendant onto the chain with the silver necklace. It felt right, like another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Thank you, Dad," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam wrapped an arm around Jake's shoulders, and they stood together in the quiet night, the stars above a reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Over the following months, the Matthews Haven continued to flourish. Jake expanded the programs to include writing workshops and outdoor survival skills, partnering with local educators and mentors. Each new addition brought more kids and families to the farmhouse, turning it into a true beacon of hope. One afternoon, Rebecca Hayes visited, her notepad in hand. "This place is incredible," she said as Jake gave her a tour. "I'd love to write a follow-up piece about what you've accomplished." Jake smiled. "That would be great, but it's not just me, it's the whole community." Rebecca nodded, jotting down notes. "Still, you're the heart of it, Jake. Your story is what inspires people." As they walked through the barn-turned music studio, Ella strummed her ukulele in the corner, leading a group of younger kids in a lively tune. Jake watched with a sense of pride and gratitude, knowing that the legacy of love and resilience he had built would continue to grow. The seasons changed, and so did Jake. He grew more confident, more sure of his place in the world. The scars of his past no longer defined him. They were part of his story, but they didn't hold him back. He carried Michael's memory with him, not as a burden, but as a source of strength and inspiration. One evening, as he sat on the farmhouse porch with Liam and Sarah, Jake spoke up, his voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about the future." "Oh?" Sarah asked, her tone encouraging. Jake nodded. "I want to keep growing the Matthews Haven. Maybe open a second location someday. There are so many kids out there who need a place like this." Liam smiled, his pride evident. "That sounds like a big dream." Jake grinned. "Yeah, but I've got a lot of people backing me up, and I think Michael would like it." Sarah reached over, squeezing his hand. "He'd love it. And so do we." As the stars appeared overhead, the Matthews family sat together, dreaming of a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. The farmhouse stood as a testament to their journey, a place where broken pieces had come together to create something whole, something beautiful.